Marian Morales, who is the caravan coordinator this year for the first time. A big job for a young person. And she is our youngest person to come to our caravan events in 18 times. Marian is a Latina. She is a native New Yorker. She graduated from John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City with a double major in forensic psychology and Latin American studies. And she has done, she's a researcher and has done research on mass incarceration in South Africa, Mexico, Dominion Republic, and Morocco. My wife and I were in Morocco. Well, no, she didn't make it. I went 3 years ago, right at the beginning of the pandemic, to give a paper at a conference. She also is a human rights activist. So we're very happy to have Marian Morales here, and she is in good company because I think we're all human rights activists in this room. Thank you.
Well, I would like to start off by saying thank you so much for opening up this space to us for the past 18 times and counting. It's truly a humbling honor to be here and share time with you all and talk about anything revolving around human rights. And I really am more than blessed to be able to have this opportunity to do so through Info Passage for Peace, who some of you may know some history about, but I'll start with that before I speak about exactly what the caravan is. And Reverend Lucius Walker, back in, he started IFCO back in the 1960s, let's say, but in specifically 1992, during the special period in Cuba, he was asked to bring down medical aid and computers down to Cuba in an act of civil disobedience against the blockade. So he was asked to bring this down, and because of what was happening politically and still continues today, he wasn't able to do so through directly the United States. So what he did was that he got his people together on the little yellow school buses across the nation, took them from the north of the country all the way through the south to cross the Mexican border and bring all this aid and things that had been donated, like computers. So what happened in 1993 was that when they got to the border, some of the buses actually were seized by law enforcement. What the people decided to do, the Caravanista at this time, the first Caravanistas, went on a hunger strike. For over 20 days, they went on this hunger strike until they got the little yellow school buses back with all this aid and made it successfully down to Cuba. So when they actually were received down on the island, Lucius and all of the Caravanista were received with such open arms and so much love, and actually the complete opposite of what we're being taught here in the United States that Cuba is like, that he made this promise to Cuba that he would continue having these caravans, that our Caravanistas would continue to come down to Cuba until the blockade was lifted. Here we are 60 plus years later, and the caravan and the blockade still continues, this inhumane, immoral blockade. So some history behind this as well is that people think that it's just sanctions. Sanctions or an embargo is all these politically correct terms that make it sound a lot less harmful than what it truly is. So sanctions are, as I'm sure all of you here know, have a lot to do economically with the state of the country and restrictions. So they aren't able to trade, which is a huge impact, especially when we live in a global world right now, in a global economy, where it's not that every country, not only Cuba needs to trade to be able to provide the resources for their communities and for all their people. So it's not only economic restrictions, but it's restrictions on travel, there's restriction on pretty much everything that affects the population of Cuba. So what the blockade really shows is that it's not just economically law enforcement, it's that it's really a war on the poor, because you're blocking people of the community from having access to general medication, any resources, fuel altogether, so things to power the country to be able for them to be able to fund themselves, they don't have access to. And a lot of my friends who are younger who don't truly understand this will ask me like, oh, but why don't they just trade with Russia? Why don't they just trade with their neighbors? And it's like, yes, but why would you need to have to trade across an ocean to be able to get a resource as simple as medication or fuel, food, to not starve your people? So the caravan, what it entails is exactly this, which has been happening for the past 60 years. It's bringing down medical aid and resources that we have access to against the blockade down to our brothers and sisters in Cuba. For the past 60 years, we've been doing this and coordinating routes, and usually I would be here asking you to bring medical aid to this event, and we would have been here with a bus and taking it down together. But this year, since the pandemic and things have changed, we've had less access to buses, and there's been so many atrocities that we are actually purchasing the aid right before we go down there with the funds that we collect here today and throughout these routes, which we're actually in over 40 cities across the nation right now. And we're buying the medical aid in June and taking it down with over 60 caravanistas this summer, which is actually 2/3 of this caravan in July happening are youth, and over 2/3 are people of color. And it's truly incredible to see how the youth really hasn't been digesting this learned hopelessness that the United States really tries to engrave in us. They really try to make us believe that we can't change anything, that we need to depend on this capitalistic system to be able to survive, that we need to continue this consumer society, and that we need to continue to turn on each other and divide and conquer. When in reality, we know that it's actually a true example of what real democracy and really what it looks like to live in community. And Cuba really serves as this example. We need Cuba more than Cuba needs us. We need Cuba to be able to survive and really continue to show us what it's like to live in community and not really destroy one another. So I say all of this to say that Cuba is an example of radical love. It's an example of the revolution continuing and being able to survive with one another again. So we're not there as heroes. We're not there to show the world to pity Cuba. Cuba has been able to really be at the top of the medical field, even with all these restrictions. They're number one in the world with preventative medicine. Here in the United States, I don't know about y'all, but I don't even trust the pharmaceutical companies. It's very hard for me as a young person to go to the doctor. I can only imagine when I get older, because I'm concerned that whatever they prescribe to me will probably make either my condition worse or cause me another condition that I won't be able to recover from. Amen. And that connecting even with Native American communities and my people from different countries, different islands, they have a history with the pharmaceutical companies and the healthcare system here of truly even making women infertile, really causing us more issues and using us as experiments. And this is just horrific. When you go to an island like Cuba, which I don't think exists anywhere else in the world, you see what it is to actually have preventative medicine, to have holistic medicine, to have a life expectancy rate even higher than the United States. Yeah. And we love to say here that we're the best. We get taught that we're the best in so many things, but what are we truly the best in? It's not a literacy rate. We don't have the highest literacy rate, not even close.
I know. The amount of paved land.
Exactly.
You've read David Swanson.
Military spend.
Curing American exception.
Incarceration.
Exactly. Yeah. We're actually the biggest terrorists of the world. And leading me in very perfectly aligned into the conversation of the state-sponsored terrorism list. People think again that it's just sanctions on Cuba, but Obama, when he was president, not to say that he's a hero because he isn't, but he at least, which at the back of my shirt you can actually see, this shirt was for the caravan of that year, which had the check mark where it says that we got Cuba off the U.S.-sponsored state terrorism list, which made things a little bit more easier and access to travel, which is what confused everybody. Everybody thought that we're able to go there legally and easily, which was a little bit true for a short period of time. And once Trump was in office, he really dedicated a lot of his presidency to make it that much more difficult. Now, again, Cuba is back on this U.S. state-sponsored terrorism list. And people ask, like, well, who controls this list? It's only the United States. So the United States, the largest terrorist, gets to say who is a terrorist in the rest of the world.
Ironic.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific to just even see if this is a conversation, let alone to talk about the United Nations and how we vote once a year on whether or not this embargo, this blockade is humane and should be lifted or not. Over 90 countries every year talk and go on this stage at the United Nations, which is supposed to be a very respectable and very, internationally recognized place. And they vote every country aside from the United States, and you can guess what other country votes.
Israel.
Exactly. Vote to the U.S. that this blockade should be lifted. And the U.S. and Israel stand up there almost every single year and always say that we're keeping it, regardless of the rest of the world talking about how inhumane this truly is and how this isn't just a political affair. I think that it's crucial to have people like us and people like you all who have been doing this type of work for decades on end to teach us really how to continue doing this. Because it is easy to fall into a learned hopelessness pattern. It is easy to believe the propaganda that is really being pushed down your throat every single day. I come from New York City, so we digest over 1 million commercials a day on consumerism and all types of other agendas. Yet we sit here and they tell us in schools and these textbooks that we have freedom of speech, that we think freely, that we have freedom of opinion. When in reality, we're being really taught the same agenda, the same textbook that's being printed in Texas and given all over the nation. We're given the same narrative over and over and over again. Also leaving out the fact of all the empowering things that our people have really done, the empowering things that Cuba has done, the empowering things that what took for the Civil War to even truly happen, for Wade versus Roe to happen, to think about the fact that we're here today really reversing the bit of really prosperous movement that we've been able to move forward with. And this is really part of the agenda. It's part of making us fearful. It's part of controlling us, manipulating us based on fear, and making us feel like we really can't change anything, that it's not worthwhile. So I invite everybody really to come down to Cuba. IFCO invites everybody to come down to Cuba and see it for yourself, because there is no better teacher, I believe, than really experiencing and traveling. Once you get there, even as soon as you land and you realize how open-armed these people really are, who we've been being told that we need to be scared of, that it's unsafe, and to land there and feel that it's the safest country I've ever been to in my lifetime, which is short, but I've traveled a lot. And it is absolutely incredible to see, to be able to dismantle all of this propaganda that I've been engraved with, and then to come back and have the culture clash that I have once you return and you realize that the life that you're being taught to live here is really as if you were a machine, as if you weren't human. And to see this island that really treats their people like humans in community, that really all the decisions that are made are thought about and spoken about and considered with every individual. One of my favorite examples to speak of is that we all like to talk about if we speak about Cuba is the Families Code that was just published. And this is very recent.
I read it.
It's incredible.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I will also share we have a toolkit that we love to share with everybody, so you can read it for yourselves, because this Families Code, for a lack of better description, is like a book of laws, really speaking to the human rights of all families and all children, and what it looks like to really be able to get defended with your human rights and really specify there aren't any loopholes. And it took them 3 years to publish their new Families Code, because they kept asking the people, what do you think? What do you think needs to be included? What do you think needs to be addressed? What isn't being addressed here? So in this Families Code is addressed the LGBTQ community. It's addressed adoption, and it addressed what a family is, how you can really decide what a family is for you, that it doesn't need to be just what the traditional way is, that life is really progressive. Communities are progressive. Here we talk about Wade versus Roe just being reversed, which I still feel like I'm in denial that this is even happening in my lifetime. Something so large is being reversed, and in so many states being accepted. And here you have Cuba, who passed this Families Code that addresses that maternity leave is 2 years. 2 years. And paternity leave. So not just the mother, but the father, and it extends to the caretaker. So let's say the mother or the father would like to go back to school, needs to go back to their job. You can actually pass down this caretaking pay to the grandmother, to the aunt, to the babysitter, and that person then gets paid. Here we're lucky we even get a week off, a month off, maybe 3 months, which is nothing even near what a newborn child needs to really be able to be raised with true love and affection the way that humans need. Here it's not considered, because everything is based on capitalism, and it's based on the individual and dividing and conquering, really. If you really convince people that they don't need each other, then it'll be so much easier to control them. And we see it really continuing to happen today, and it's sad. But really what is not sad is to see how much youth is learning from people like all of you who have been doing this for so many years, and how to continue to do it progressively today. because the fight doesn't end here. The fight will always continue, and the war will always continue to be on the poor, because the 1% will not like to let go of this power. So it really is our job. We need to be able to carry on this responsibility, because we can't stop. And we need Cuba again more than they need us. I also can't stop talking or like end this conversation without speaking about ELAM and the healthcare programs in Cuba. ELAM is the International Latin American School of Medicine that is based in Cuba. Fidel Castro, one of the promises he made before he passed and when he started the revolution was that he invested a lot of money into the healthcare system in Cuba. And with that being said, with the core system being revolution and being changed and community oriented, he promised the rest of the world that they would continue to share this healthcare system internationally. And part of that was giving 10 free scholarships to over 90 countries a year, so that people from their countries, other countries, can come study from this holistic and preventative healthcare system for free in Cuba. And we think about this, and everyone always thinks about, okay, so then what's the trade for them? What do they gain access to? Because we're so taught to be consumery and to be thinking about capitalistic and gains that actually is the exact opposite. The one promise that Fidel asked for is that if you come to study for free, you get your medical degree in Cuba, you need to return back to your country, back to your community, and actually share this resource and share this knowledge with your people. I don't want you to stay with us. There is no gain for us. We want you to actually spread what true healthcare actually looks like. And so now over 500 graduates from the ELAM school are all over the world who continue to spread this education, continue to practice this true medicine that is preventative. Right now, IFCO is in charge of the ELAM scholarship in the United States. So if you happen to know of any young folk who are interested in studying medicine, and I know many people who are deferred from even studying it because the biggest debt in the United States is student loans. Right. So they don't even consider it because they think, I just can't afford it. And they don't know that they have this resource because it's hidden from us. It's a hidden gem. And so I invite you to share with anybody that you know, whether they have children or not, because you never know who would like to apply this year or the next year. So this year it's open until July 9th, and every year we open up the application again, and there's 10 free scholarships. So when it comes to the examples of truly how Cuba is a true democracy and an example of radical international love and solidarity, our prime examples would be the ELAM program, just their healthcare system altogether. Their literacy rate is over 99%. The life expectancy rate is at one of the highest of the world. The Families Code is a true practicing example, progressive example of how you treat your communities, and so much more. So I invite you all to come to Cuba whenever you can, if you can, with us or any organization. And anything that you donate will also definitely be used to buy aid that we will bring in solidarity in July.
You know, you mentioned about Cuba being a democracy, but the propaganda we get is that it is a dictatorship. Mm-hmm. Can you, and I don't think people understand the democracy, how it works in Cuba. I learned it when I went there. Mm-hmm. And I know, but every time I hear them call Cuba dictatorship, you know, it just makes me angry. Can you explain how Cuba is a democracy in a different way? Mm-hmm.
The way that Cuba practices democracy, and the most recent example I like to give is the Families Code, because they have these city councils, these town councils all over the country, in every part of the country, whether it's something that's a lot more rural and country or whether it's a city. And everybody gets asked to vote, and everybody has a representative that is chosen by the actual community. And these people get to actually come together, have these conversations, and again, why it takes them 2 to 3 years to come to an agreement, because they get asked time and time again, what is your input? What is your community asking for? What would you guys like to see? What are you seeing in your community and in your town that needs to get addressed? And so they actually get asked to participate. Versus here in the United States, we have this illusion that all of our communities and all of our population we have a vote, and then the vote goes in, and even if the majority votes anything, it doesn't matter, because the electoral vote will go over, and really it's the politics that go into it, and then we feel like we made a decision, but in reality it wasn't us. And they teach us this in school, but we don't really see it put into practice until we get older. In Cuba, since you're a child, you are really taught about what is the history of your country, what was the revolution, what does it take to really have community-oriented democracy and really be focused on sharing and your opinion mattering. Versus here, it's you get sold an illusion. And so that's one example. Another example I like to give is, well, I'll get back to you, but I would like to hear about your experience.
Well, my experience was that, like you said, it's a ground up. It's a ground up kind of democracy. It's organized at the local level, and it's representative from the local level, and then it goes up, but quite differently from the way we do it. But to call it not a democracy is ignorant, because people do get a voice there from the ground level up.
That's really why I invite people to come see it, because it's the same thing when you speak about the freedom of religion. People think that there's no freedom of religion in Cuba. And you go and you see mosques and churches and all types of different types of religion being practiced, and it just depends on the people there. And then you really untangle and dismantle this propaganda that you've been being taught, because it's really the opposite. And most of the people that I know, including myself, I come back feeling very ashamed of what the United States is, because it's the complete opposite of what you're being taught. That they're bad people, that they have no opinion, that they have no democracy, that they have no human rights. When it comes to the healthcare system, that's the example that I was going to give, that although it might not be their right political democracy, but even the primary care physician, instead of it just being in a hospital building, which I actually just read an incredible article about how hospitals are the most expensive industry in the United States, but it's the one place you don't hear a noise when you're being charged your money. You don't hear a cha-ching. You don't hear anything that indicates that you're being charged. And it's the most expensive thing here. Yet in Cuba, you don't go to a building necessarily. You have your primary care physician actually visit your home, visit your town. They know your community. They know your history. They know your family's history. So when anything comes up in your health, it's very noticeable. It's very obtainable. It's very preventable for you to get worse, because they already know you. It's not a stranger that's looking at your history on a computer thinking like, oh, well, what did your last doctor say? And let's just take a guess over here and do an exam over there. And I can probably charge a little bit extra if I do this exam as well. Over there, it's not that at all, because they're not getting any capital gain from it. It's really based on the community and how can we make our lifespans longer for each other, with each other, and help each other grow. And that to me is democracy, because that is when healthcare and education are free, when the primary things are the things that are being cared for the people, that's when we talk about democracy. That's when we practice human rights. And here it's the exact opposite. So what is this illusion of democracy that we have here? I was also taught that even when you're in school, or when you hear the United States on the news say like, oh, we're in such and such place, we're in such and such country because we're protecting their human rights, because we need to defend democracy. It's always a red flag, because it's like, what democracy are you protecting? Who are you protecting? No, what's the agenda here? Because it's never what they're telling us. Right now, it's a scary time, considering that I remember being very little, like a kid, and them telling us in general, like at some point technology would surpass us. At some point technology would advance faster than us. And now we're living and seeing how the AI and this computers, this technology is advancing so far ahead that we're very close to not even knowing what's reality and what's not. Right now, they can literally you can speak for 5 seconds into a phone, and they can identify your voice and repeat it and make it sound like a machine is saying something in exactly your voice. And you will think that it's a recording of yourself. And it's crazy to think that this is really obtainable. This is happening right now. And so the time to act and the time to help Cuba, the time to learn from Cuba, and again, we need them more than they need us, is now. Because I can't imagine a world without Cuba. I can't imagine living in a world where this example doesn't exist.
I have a question. How does the politics of our elections justify perpetuating the status of terrorist? It's not a financial benefit. We don't gain anything from calling Cuba a terrorist state. Why? I haven't heard the justification, and that's probably a good bit of the problem.
So Fidel Castro himself said that Cuba got lucky, because Cuba is one of the islands, along with the Philippines, that was actually gifted by Spain, I believe, to the United States. And with the Bay of Pigs, when Russia and the United States had actually implemented war tactics close to Russia first. And then they were being asked, like, did you put bombs, did you point missiles at us? and the United States was denying everything. We haven't done anything. We're at peace. We're not preparing for anything. Russia found out that it was actually false, and then they placed their missiles pointing at the U.S. in Cuba. It could have been Puerto Rico, it could have been Dominican Republic, it could have been anywhere else, but it happened to be in Cuba, and this is the one thing that the United States has latched onto and said that this is why Cuba is a terrorist. This is why this is a state of terrorism, and this is why we occupy Guantanamo there. Mind you, Guantanamo, people think that Guantanamo is just a military base or just a prison, and it's a whole region of land. It's actually one of the best ports in the world. And the United States occupies space there as a terrorist, saying that they are paying to be there, that they are occupying space because they have been paying. And Cuba has not accepted one penny from the United States because they never agreed to this altogether. I was truly amazed the first time I went to Cuba, and it was to Santiago and Guantanamo, and we actually had an interchange with young Cuban soldiers there. And it really boggled my mind because these young Cuban soldiers from ages like 20 to 22, they were with their chest held high. They were extremely proud of what they were doing. They knew what they were standing on. They knew what their grounds were and really what their morality is, and they were proud. And it was very different having a conversation with them and really believing that that they know the truth versus what I see here in the United States, that militarism and all these war tactics are being sold to our high school kids in a way as if opportunity, as if you get treated better if you become a veteran. And we all know that this is not the case, that you serve your country and then you get treated, if not worse, by the country itself. And you come back with PTSD and so many other issues because you realize while you're away that what you're fighting for isn't what they told you were fighting for. Right. And it's a very different reality when you go see it for yourself over there. So The Bay of Pigs is a book called The True Story of the Bay of Pigs. I would recommend to read. It's a really good book.
Hey, Jim, I think that one of the things that our government, first of all, our ruling class can never forgive any nation that has a socialist revolution. That is unforgivable. Right. And second, the big threat that Cuba and nations like that pose is the threat of a good example.
I was going to say
the threat of a good example. We cannot let a socialist nation be a good example for the rest of the world. So we have to put all kinds of obstacles in the way. We have to try to overthrow them. We have our color revolutions. We have all kinds of excuses, so-called, quote, humanitarian intervention, which is so bogus anyway.
I'm just overwhelmed with the parallels between...
We can never forgive. We couldn't forgive Russia for 1917. The Soviet Union, that's unforgivable. They actually threw the Tsar, killed the Tsar's family. What a horrible thing. But you're not socialist. We don't want to have a socialist government around, and we want everything to be under control of the United States. Hegemony in the world, that's our goal right now. One world controlled by our rules-based order, and that's what we want. And we can't tolerate a good example of some other country that goes another way and does it better than us. That's a bad example.
There's even documents that say exactly that's the agenda. The agenda is because they have realized that Fidel at the time had over 70% of the people in his favor, that it would be impossible to be able to overthrow him with the people. So what they need to do is cause psychological and poverty, and make them be desperate enough to be able to make them even think that this is the wrong way to go, and that way then we can overpower them and win back Cuba and show them how it's not the right option, that socialism will not work. When in reality it is working, it's just a war psychologically from the inside out. So you're causing desperateness.
Is freedom of religion, freedom of press celebrated? Do you have complete range of freedom in the newspapers and the radio?
Yes. And you hear the opposite. And actually, I think it's really interesting to see now how they've been opening the access to media, right, to internet. And it's not that they didn't have access before, because I'm a generation that was introduced to Instagram on like all of these platforms, and I have friends over there that are on Instagram who I've had them since I first went over there. It's interesting to see though how the United States and these first world powers use these tactics to be able to manipulate the masses and be able to convince them that they have this American dream available over here. So it's like, it's an interesting battle and interesting conversation with the youth there that thinks that this is better, that think that this is truly a better outcome, to have more material gain than to have free education and healthcare and community oriented thinking.
So they don't ban books in Cuba.
They do here.
I'm just saying, I like to hear it from,
I
we
think
don't have
her-
banned books like we have in the schools, can't teach the real history of our, past. And
No, if anything, what I've seen is that it's the most progressive education system that I've seen. I've seen them actually change their textbooks every time that I go to address certain topics more adequately and told by the people
Well,
themselves.
you mentioned the
Jim, I
source
think
of our
her-
misinformation in Texas.
Jim,
Yeah.
I think Herb had a question. Maybe other
Please.
people can.
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking of history here, and I think to truly understand our government's antagonism towards Cuba, we have to go way back, and that is from George Washington all the way through our history. We have always coveted, we've always wanted Cuba. We tried to annex it several times, we tried to buy it from Spain several times.
Mhm.
In the 1898, they had a revolution, they were on the verge of winning, and we went in with their, and basically we stole that revolution from them. We signed a treaty with Spain, we got Spain's colonies, and so that's always been there. And basically, with the Castro Revolution in '59, that was the first time they really had a chance at their own sovereignty.
Mhm.
Because we had wrecked from the 1900s until '60, we basically controlled the country politically, economically, totally, even though nominally they had their own government. But that is so deep in our psyche that we've always wanted that country, and we just cannot accept the fact that they have their own sovereignty. And the blockade, and all of our travel bans and so on, is basically from that reason. We just cannot accept it. I'd also like to share a very strong memory when I went down, and it sort of ties together the medical school and the blockade. When I went down, it was probably about 10 years ago. It was the year before Lucius died. He went with us